Faithbook Friday. If you remember, last week we started a series on be attitudes. Now, these are attitudes and characteristics that as a Christian we should demonstrate to the world around us. And we're taking those from Proverbs 31. Now, remember, these are not just for women. These are characteristics that men should also exhibit. So during the month of June, we'll be talking about some men who exhibit some of these characteristics. And last week we talked about Esther and the fact that we should be a blessing to others. And I am doing these on just little 4x4 cards because I'm going to slip each of these into a peekaboo pocket. Now, these are Creative Memories peekaboo pockets. But at the end of this, I'll be layering these on this page. So I'm not going to go ahead and tape it down yet. But the back side of it has our quote, "Perhaps this is the moment for which you have been created." And I hope you have been looking for ways to be a blessing to other people. Now, today we're going back to Proverbs 31 first, and we're going to look at verse 13. Verse 13 says, "She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands." So our be attitude for this week is to be a delightful worker. Now, the New Testament has some things to say about work and how we should approach it. And we're going to look at Colossians 3, verses 23 and 24. Colossians 3, 23 and 24. "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving." Sometimes that's really hard to do, especially when we work with people who are just not always perfect. I mean, let's face it. Sometimes we are not perfect people. We are not perfect workers. But God encourages us to be the kind of worker that works for the Lord and not for humans. We're also going to look at Philippians 2. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians comes right before Colossians. Philippians 2, verses 14 through 16. "Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault, in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky, as you hold firmly to the word of life. And then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor in vain." We had my youngest son memorize part of this verse when he was little. Do everything without grumbling or arguing. Because how often do we do a job, and even when we're working for the Lord, sometimes we grumble and complain about that job, or we have to do this and other people don't have to do this hard a job. So we should do our jobs like we're working for the Lord, and we should do those things without grumbling or complaining. Now, our example for being a delightful worker is going to be Ruth. So we are going back into the Old Testament again. And I think Ruth is such a beautiful example of working for the Lord, being a hard worker. Now, if you know the backstory of Ruth, her husband has died, and Ruth is a Moabite woman. But when her husband dies, her brother-in-law also dies, her father-in-law also dies, and her mother-in-law, Naomi, decides to go back to Bethlehem, where her family is from. And she tells her daughter-in-laws, "You can stay here, you can continue your life here, you can go back to the home of your father." But Ruth decides she is going back with Naomi to a strange land, a place that she has never known before. And we see Ruth's first example of being a hard worker in Ruth chapter 2 and verse 2. Now, let's go ahead and start in verse 1. "Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, 'Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor.'" I think most important to me in that verse 2 is the fact that Ruth immediately said, "Let me go and work for our family. Let me do whatever I can do for someone who finds favor in me." So she was a hard worker. She initiated the fact that she was going to work. She didn't go back to Naomi's land and sit around waiting for something to happen. She initiated that. Then we move on to verse 6 of chapter 2. And Boaz has come home and he said, who is this woman? Who does she belong to? The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. And that was verse 6 and 7. But the overseer has noticed Ruth's work ethic, because she stays from morning until evening, and she works except for a very short rest in the shelter. Continuing on in chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. So Boaz comes to talk to Naomi, and Naomi says, why have I found favor in your eyes, and you notice me, a foreigner? Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So Boaz commends her for her work ethic at this point and tells her that people have noticed, and he's asking God to bless her for that. And then on in verse 17, so Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. And carrying on in verse 18, she carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. So not only did Ruth work really hard, but she shared the bounty from her work with her mother-in-law, Naomi. Now, it's quite enough that Ruth was a hard worker, and I would assume that she worked delightfully, just given the fact that people noticed it. You know, I used to teach kindergarten, and one thing I could always say is everybody knew the good kids and everybody knew the bad kids. Well, I think the same kind of holds true here. Probably the overseers, everybody knew the bad workers, everybody knew the good workers. And Ruth was obviously counted among the delightful workers, one who worked hard for what she received. Now, the verse that I pulled to put in your printables for this is from Ruth 2:12, and it's where Boaz was speaking to Ruth, and he said, the Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. I think this is a very unique verse. It's unique wording for Boaz to say, because the Moabites did not believe in the God of Israel. Yet Boaz says, I want the Lord to repay you for what you've done. You have come to the Lord God of Israel for refuge. I'm not even sure at this point that Ruth knew she had come to the Lord God of Israel for refuge. She just knew that she was coming to help her mother-in-law, and she did so delightfully. Now, because we are approaching Mother's Day, I wanted us to go to one more verse, and I love the way the Bible works together to tell us these stories. But in Matthew chapter 1, I guess we recognize the end of the story of Ruth. Eventually, Ruth and Boaz got married, and they were able to have a baby named Obed. And in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, we hear the lineage of Jesus. And in verse 5, it says, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Not only was Ruth a delightful worker, but she was listed in the genealogy of Jesus, a Moabite, a person who came from a country that did not believe in the one true God. Yet, because of her work ethic, because of where God put her at this specific time with the people he put her with, she was able to become the mother of a son named Obed, who eventually led to Jesse, who led to King David, who led eventually to the birth of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. What a beautiful story of a delightful worker. I hope that this weekend, if you are celebrating Mother's Day with your mother, with your children, with people who have been like mothers in your life, maybe even your spiritual mother, someone who led you to know the Lord, I hope that you will feel God's presence in your life this week, that you will recognize that He is the one true God, and that He loves you and He provides for you. Even as we strive to be delightful workers, God provides everything that we need. So remember this week, every page tells His story.